So today we have Ryan Murray. He's a professor in the Electronic Media and Film Department here at Towson, and also our first Facet Fellow for Emerging Technologies, and his specialty is in virtual reality. And we've done a couple of workshops throughout the semester um, on how to create virtual reality, but today he's going to look into some software to edit video created in 360 environments. So thank you, Ryan, and thank you everyone for joining us today.
Thanks, David. Yep, I'm Ryan Murray. I teach in electronic media and film, and I'm also a filmmaker and video artist myself. And for the last 3 or 4 years, I've been really interested in virtual reality technology. And I've been making some VR video, as well as teaching a special topics undergrad class in making VR films. So this time, I'm sort of piggybacking on a previous workshop that we did where I talked about VR cameras, 360 video cameras like this, the Views XR, which is essentially a small camera that has 2 fisheye lenses that get video from all sides, not just front and back, but above you and below you, so that it creates a kind of sphere around you that you are inside, to create an immersive video, a video that you feel like you're inside. Now, in that previous workshop, which was recorded and you can find on Facet's YouTube page, right, David? I talked about how what you can do to use those cameras and which cameras work well, and also a little bit about how you can do simple trims, you know, in like an app that comes with the camera for your phone. But if you really want to get into post-production, like more complicated editing, even just putting titles on these things or having multiple shots linked together, but then even go further and do some sort of really interesting visual effects that can be done with virtual reality video. That's what we're going to talk about today. So let me fire up PowerPoint for a second, just to give you a visual aid here. Here, I'm going to share my sound and screen. And we're going to run this PowerPoint. So we're talking about virtual reality video editing in Adobe Premiere. Now, I guess my first question to those of you who are here is, do you have any experience in Adobe Premiere? If I show you the interface, will you know what you're looking at, or should I step back and give you a quick tour of Premiere before I get into it?
Yeah, I have some good amount of experience with Premiere myself. I'm not sure about everyone else. Maybe you can do a thumbs up if you have some experience.
Okay, good. I didn't know. You know, every once in a while you get somebody who's like, I'm just interested, but I don't know what I'm looking at, which would be fine. And if people are watching this recorded and you haven't worked with Premiere before, that's fine. But I won't start at absolute square one, since people know what they're doing. But anyway, the first thing I really want to show you is an example of what I think could be a really good, like, sort of scholarly use for virtual reality video. Now, I'm using it as a creative art practice, right, to make you know, cool or meaningful visual art. But I think there's a lot of use value in it in terms of getting your research or your scholarship or your teaching documented, and allow someone to kind of travel with you to places they might not otherwise have access to. I think there's a really good example. I lean on this example a lot, actually, of how to make sort of something out of nothing with VR video. So this comes from the American Museum of Natural History, and it is essentially like a very short, like 3-minute documentary, all in 360 VR, about a paleontological expedition, and then the collection of fossils that came from it. So this is pre-recorded, but it's me watching it in a headset. So when you see you know, the camera seemed to pan around, that was me moving my head or looking all over. Okay. All right, here we go.
The Gobi Desert is a vast place. It occupies 500,000 square miles, one of the largest deserts in the world. The Gobi is also one of the few great large areas that's a real treasure for dinosaurs, early mammals, and other forms of prehistoric life. The Central Asiatic expeditions, headed by Roy Chapman Andrews from the American Museum of Natural History, occurred between 1922 and 1930. Roy Chapman Andrews was one of the most famous explorers in the museum's history. Roy was the leader, he was the organizer, he was the fundraiser. He was very flamboyant, kind of a dashing explorer figure. The Central Asiatic expeditions were a massive, massive undertaking. Over 120 camels, 40 scientists and technicians. It was the first time that an expedition extensively used motor cars. So it was a very elaborate and a highly organized effort. This is not a hospitable place, the Gobi Desert. And in the 1920s, a very poorly mapped, a very poorly known region. It really presented a lot of challenges and a lot of dangers to the expedition. Sandstorms and dust storms and high winds. There were poisonous snakes, there were bandits, and it's hard to find your way around. At the very end of the field season in 1922, Roy Chapman Andrews and the expedition were lost. Roy and some members of the team got out of their vehicles to ask for directions. But while they were doing that, their cameraman, Shackelford, walked over to the edge of this plateau and looked down, and he saw this amazing array of red cliffs, the flaming cliffs. Shackelford walked down and he started to find fossils. And then he was joined by other members of the team, and they started crawling around and they started finding all this stuff. But it was already the end of the season and they knew they had to come back. Well, they did come back in 1923, and the rest is history. They found all these dinosaurs there, Protoceratops, oviraptors, the dinosaur nest eggs, and some very small, very important fossil mammals. So this is a very, very important area, evolutionary speaking, because it preserves the best evidence of these early mammals that give us clues to how modern mammals evolved and branched out and diversified into all the wondrous kinds of mammals we see today. I'm Mike Novacek, Provost of Science and a curator of paleontology here at the American Museum of Natural History. On the shelves around us, you see a lot of fossils. Many of these fossils were collected by the Central Asiatic expeditions in the 1920s to the Gobi Desert of Mongolia that were led by Roy Chapman Andrews. And the important thing about these specimens is that we are still making discoveries about them. There's more to learn. So even specimens that were discovered many, many years ago are still inspiring new and original work in the science of paleontology.
All right, cool. So that's my example of what I think is really powerful about VR editing for a sort of, you know, scholarly documentation. Now, I myself am not a paleontologist, nor a historian, nor a museologist or anything. I think the subject matter is cool, but I also think how it was made was really inspiring to me as a filmmaker, because I presume you caught it if you think about, like, how did they make all of those old archival pieces of footage VR? They didn't have VR cameras in 1920 or 30 or whenever, you know. And the answer is they didn't. They faked all of it, right? By using video collage in a program like Premiere. And or After Effects. But we're going to look at Premiere today, and we're essentially going to rip that whole project off. I'm going to teach you everything that they did so that you could too. So that is my goal. A couple of things that I want to point out before I get into showing you exactly how. A couple of the things that I thought were notable. One is that the strategy in the first half, where they've sort of taken us back to the past, is essentially using a 360 still photograph as a background, and then bringing still rectangular photographs and still rectangular video into that 360 space and just fuzzing out the edges and pasting it on like a collage. And especially it being black and white helps because it all sort of more or less fades together. I mean, the viewer can kind of tell it's all patchwork, you know, but that's part of the fun of it. They're also using some kind of visual effects like motion graphics, lines and circles to draw your attention to certain places. That's something we have to think about as VR editors, is like, you can't make someone look any particular direction. You have to convince them to look in a certain direction. So using movement and color and circling things and, you know, circles and arrows and all of that, to like the old Arlo Guthrie song, is an important use for moving our eye around. So let me take you into Premiere and show. Switch to this view, and if my head gets in the way at some point, I can get rid of my head too. But this here's my ripoff of what we just saw. I shot some footage in my backyard with that Views camera that I talk about in another workshop, which has been recorded if you want to check that one out too. And then I did this thing where I was like, okay, imagine this was the dig site of some expedition, and this is what it looks like today, but in the past, this was, you know, undeveloped land, and it looked like this. And back in 1923, you know, Ryan Murray went on an expedition, and here was the map. And here were all the, you know, people driving motor cars, and there were unusual iguanas, and you know what I'm saying? Like I've got the same sort of structure that was built in the fossil hunting in the Gobi piece. I particularly like this possum crawling down this tree. I worked extra hard on that one. And then here was, you know, my partner in crime on the expedition, and there's me back in 1934. I was an important paleontologist back then. And then I show up into the museum, you know, archives. I'm an important expert, and I have some visual effects that point us to different parts of this space. Okay? So that's my ripoff. That's what we're going to learn how to do, right? Yeah. Eminently doable. I mean, there's some tricks here, but you can do this. I did this. So, all right, let's back up and start from scratch. When you start any project in Premiere, you're probably going to go File, New Project, and you give it a name like Facet Demo 2, and then you hit OK. And there are some presets in Premiere that deal with VR. But another good way to set up a VR project is if you have footage from a 360 camera. Like if you shot 360 already, you can drag that stuff in, sorry, I just got a private message. Is everybody can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. All right. Good. So if you have 360 footage, then oh, you're not seeing it?
Sorry, Ryan. Yeah, all I'm seeing is your screen inside your window. I'm not seeing it on my full screen.
My screen inside my window. What I hope everybody to be seeing is Premiere, large, and then me in the corner, just
I'm
so you
seeing
don't
all
hear
the I'm seeing all the attendees and you in your own individual Zoom window. So I'm seeing Bob and Dave and Dominique.
I was seeing the same. I was seeing the same thing, Greg. Yeah, I think you have to switch to a different view in the upper right corner. There's a should be a for full screen. That corrected the problem for me.
Yeah,
Go to
there's
full
an
screen?
option on the option at the top of Zoom. There's a gallery view or a speaker view.
Right.
Try hitting the speaker view, and you should be able to see Ryan's screen.
Once he starts talking, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the reason, Greg, incidentally, that's happening, I guess, is I'm using OBS to kind of have me on top of my screen at the moment, but it doesn't like take over your full screen in the same way that a share would. If that ends up being a problem for anybody, I can share in the typical way.
No,
Would that be easier?
The speaker view is perfect.
Okay. All right. Good deal. So incidentally, while we're making stuff happen, here's some links that I'm going to use. I'm putting them in the chat right now. And the first one says files, and it's 1 gigabyte, but it's a zip file of everything that I used to make that little mock-up that I showed you a second ago. And so if you want to follow along with me right now, I guess start downloading quick and fire up Premiere or whatever. But I think maybe it would be easier to just, I'll walk you through it, and then this will be recorded and you could follow along a second time, having downloaded those. But, you might want to save these links if you think you'll use them, because I guess the chat will disappear. That second link is just a link to the YouTube version of fossil hunting in the Gobi, which we're using as our exemplar here. And then I grabbed a couple of these materials that we're about to use from Wikimedia Commons and from archive.org. So I'll show you those in a second, but if I can jump back to Premiere for a moment, my process is basically this. I am grabbing all the files that are relevant to this project, which are these ones. And I just click and drag them into the import media to start section of Premiere. This is my project files. So here, if I let me just can all these previous ones from the finished project. And then here in Premiere, in versions for the last couple of years, in this timeline section, if you have no timeline at all, it'll say drop media here to create a sequence. And that's how I have been tending to tell my students to make stuff happen lately, because if I drag my 360 footage, which is like these 2 video files that start HET_, that's the naming scheme that comes from the camera I used. If I just drag that here, my project's already set up to be VR. Like, it does most of the hard work for me. If you want to know what the sequence settings should be, though, you can either do a new sequence preset, or you can go up to sequence settings. And here, the operative issues are going to be the frame size, which is like resolution. And then down on the bottom, there's this thing that says VR properties. Everything in the middle, it's not unimportant, but it's like the sound settings and all the other stuff. So not unusual for any other video project. The frame size that the camera I shot on, the Views XR, its resolution is 5760 by 2880, which is a little better than 4K. It's what they're calling 5.7K, which isn't exactly an industry standard, but it's a pretty big file, which means that it will be tough on Premiere, when you're cutting better than 4K video when you're cutting VR. So heads up, if you're using it on a small laptop or something, it may churn. But that's the settings that I'm using, 5760 by 2880. And then down here under VR properties, VR video works like a map. You know how the Earth is round, so long as you believe that. And when we try to map it on a flat rectangle, we have to use what's called a projection. And there are a bunch of different map projections, right? Well, VR uses what's called an equirectangular projection, trying to take a round sphere that we're going to occupy and spread it out into a rectangle. So that's what we're going to set this as, an equirectangular projection. And ours is going to be monoscopic, meaning it's not 3D. It doesn't have depth. If you shot with a camera that had depth, then more power to you, but I don't have one. So that's what we're doing. And then by default, the horizontal view is 360 and the vertical view is 180. Those are the only settings we have to set to make this a VR project. Okay. So mine did that automatically just by dragging the right kind of footage in to the timeline. But if you're starting from scratch or you're just making a video collage with no 360 camera available, you can copy those exact settings and still create a 360 video without ever shooting on a 360 camera. Okay? I know that's just boring numbers, but it's sort of important setup. Does anybody have questions about that stuff before we click OK? All right, good deal. I mean, just housekeeping, by dragging these files over, it automatically makes the timeline the same title, the same file name as the video clip I dragged in. So that's going to be confusing. So I'm going to change that and just call it Facet Demo 2. So that'll be my timeline's name, my sequence's name. And here is what equirectangular video looks like in a normal Premiere monitor window. You can see my whole office all spread out, and this is like a rectangular rug on the floor, right? So you see how weird it is, like unfolded like an orange peel. Luckily, we don't have to work with it like this. Sometimes it's useful, but we can toggle to a more normal view, so to speak. And mine's kind of already set up this way because I already made this, but you see this little plus sign here underneath your program monitor, which is the right monitor of the two in Premiere. There's a plus sign. It's kind of next to your icons, your VCR controls. If you click that, there's a whole bunch of extra icons that aren't on that control bar by default. I actually didn't even know that until I started working with VR video. There's a bunch of extra ones that you might find useful. But this one is supposed to look like a face with a VR headset on it. What it actually looks like is a rectangle over top of an oval. But that one, if you hover over it, should say toggle VR video display. And if that's not already on your toolbar, then you just click and drag it down and you drop it on your toolbar. So now that I have toggle VR video display down here as a tool, I can just click it. And it switches from this full equirectangular view to something that looks more like I'm looking through a window at part of the image. Now, if yours doesn't look like mine, it's because by default, Premiere has this weird interface that's like, it'll have a square and then it'll have, here, I can re-accomplish it, I guess. It'll have these little controls where you can change like by degrees or by turning a knob. I just think this is an irresponsible use of screen real estate. I don't need these. So I right click on the image and go under VR video and uncheck show controls, which just makes my image a little bigger, but I can still move around my image by clicking and dragging, just like I'm grabbing the image and dragging. So that lets me look anywhere I want without having to lose space to those little twirly knobs on the side. So that's another good setup trick. The last thing that you might notice if you're following along is yours is probably square by default. And mine looks widescreen. That's because I changed one other setting. It's under VR video again. So I got to this by right clicking the image and going to VR video. And then under settings, By default, I think these are 108, 108 for some reason, and it looks like this. So this is probably what yours looks like, if you're following along. I like to do 180 for the monitor view horizontal and 90 for the vertical. It just looks more like not wasting space to me. So that's how I set up my my VR program monitor window. And then if I ever need to see the full thing, I can just toggle here and see the full thing. And if I want to see part of the image, then I'm here. Okay. So now that's more or less the setup that would make this feel different than cutting in Premiere in any other situation. If you happen to have like a tethered VR headset, like an Oculus or a Vive or any of those things attached to your editing computer, it's pretty cool. Premiere lets you, with this Adobe immersive environment, it'll actually let you like put on the headset and watch your movie and look around, you know, as you're cutting it. So you don't even have to click and drag. There's even for VR controllers, there's a little bit of like, you can't exactly edit in the headset, but you can do the VCR controls and stuff to playback. But either way, you can definitely make a VR film without even needing the headset. Or the camera, really, which is what I'm about to show you. So here's the final shot, I guess, of my my mock-up. I had me walk in this door, right? So just like in any Premiere editing situation, if I've got too much head on this clip, I can just grab the end of it and trim it in, right? So what I'm trying to demonstrate is there's no difference between VR video and normal video in terms of editing it. It's, you know, now it's shorter. It looks on the timeline exactly the same. The only real difference is how you monitor it and deal with it. If your computer is really bogged down by trying to play back such a big file, there is a playback resolution pull down on your program monitor window. And mine's set at full resolution right now, but if I knock it down to half or even a quarter or less, the image will look a little more fuzzy as I'm cutting, but it does no permanent damage to the quality of the piece. It's just for playback, and I'll get a better frame rate. So if you're cutting on a laptop or something, you might need to be down to a quarter or an eighth, and even you know, you'll still hopefully be able to get decent playback. Okay, cool. So I guess we'll start last first, just because I can demonstrate a fundamental problem with putting flat images or titles or flat video or anything, where any collage element onto VR video. It creates a problem. So let me show you that. We're going to make a title. So in Premiere lately, the way I've been doing it is go up to graphics and then new layer and choose text. So typically, I would usually be able to double click this text layer and change what it says. But when your VR video is toggled on, you actually can't do it, because clicking and dragging is supposed to move your video around. So I'm going to toggle it off. And I'm going to throw this on top of me. And I'm going to double click it. There it is. And do whatever I did last time, right? So here's my lower third, which is meaningless in a VR world. And then if I go back here, it's on there. We're good, right? It's cool. But what if I wanted it lower, right? Like instead of just at my waistline, what if I were like, okay, I just want this down on the South Pole for some reason. So typically what you would do is you would double click a clip, go to effect controls, and under video motion, I would change its position. So I would start dragging it down. But look what happens. As I get close to the poles, my image starts to get sucked into the vortex, right? And if I really wanted my name like straight up at the South Pole, I can't have it. Like it it goes away, right? And this is that equirectangular projection coming into play, sort of creating problems for us with images that are not equirectangular projections. So we never want to move the position or even the scale or anything of flat video, so to speak, like just collage elements that weren't shot on a 360 camera that we're putting into a 360 project, because it kind of screws everything up if we change stuff in the normal way. Luckily, so I'm just going to edit undo and bring it back to its standard place. Luckily, Premiere has provided a whole set of effects that deal with VR video. So we can do the things we would intuitively want to do, like move stuff around in the sphere and not have it disappear down a drain, right? And you can find all these by default in our bottom left window. There's an effects tab. If you don't see it, there's these double arrows that show more of the tabs that are on there. So under effects, you can under effects, there's like a little search bar here. If you start typing VR, every one of the VR effects has VR in the title. So you'll just see all of the VR effects and all of the video transitions for VR. These are all the things that Premiere provides, that Adobe provides in Premiere, that are that would be messed up if you put the normal version on VR video. So like the effect that's normally called blur gets messed up. The denoise effect, the glow effect. The reason that all of these get messed up is because they don't wrap at the edge of the frame. So you'll reveal the illusion that the video doesn't just go over top, it'd like pinch at the top and bottom. So Adobe has made VR versions of all of these. So you'll recognize some of these if you've used Premiere, like blur is like already a normal effect. This just fixes it for VR. But the one that is going to do almost all the heavy lifting this afternoon is VR plane to sphere. So what that title is trying to communicate is that we're taking a plane, flat video, like my name or a JPEG or a normal piece of video that isn't VR video. We're taking a plane and we're mapping it to a sphere, which is what VR video is trying to be. So all we do is we click VR plane to sphere and we drag and drop it onto our clip. Now, all of a sudden, we get a different look to that original footage. And this sort of exposes some of the weirdness of working with flat video in a VR environment. You'll first notice that it gets a lot smaller. The other thing you might notice is in a headset, this actually looks kind of concave, and it would be more obvious the longer the text is. Ryan Murray is the best facet presenter. Starts to, sorry everybody, starts to look really concave, like it's on a cylinder, when it's not been made VR, right? But as soon as we put VR plane to sphere on it, it's actually flat, which is probably what we intended. Now, if you went back and looked at the Gobi Desert one, some of their stuff they kept cylindrical because they liked the look, presumably. But the limit of doing that is, like, if I like this wrapping around, cool, but I can only do it at the equator. Remember, if I start moving it too far away from the equator, it starts stretching. So if I don't want it to stretch, I need to do VR plane to sphere. And in VR plane to sphere's motion properties, there's all this other stuff that is not, here, let me show you. Here, VR plane to sphere, there's all these other settings that are not these settings. So we're never gonna touch scale. We're never gonna touch position. We're gonna go down to VR plane to sphere and use its scale. And what scale does now is make this thing look more or less close to the viewer's eye. So if you want something to appear like it's very close or very far, you would achieve it with scale under VR plane to sphere. If it starts to blow out, that's probably a job for going back in this case and dealing with the font size. You know, like we just need to up the font size to get this to be larger or whatever. But other things that VR plane to sphere can do well are under rotate source or rotate projection. Even though rotate source is first, I'm going to show you rotate projection first because it's more intuitive. When you roll this open with a little twirly, you've got three choices, X, Y, or Z axis. So X is going to swing us, in this case, down around the bottom. So problem solved, right? When I said before you couldn't put it on the South Pole, now you can. So incidentally, if you're shooting with a VR camera and you notice you see the legs of your tripod here, this is how you could put like a logo over that to hide the legs of the tripod. You would just VR plane to sphere like a circle image and roll it down to the bottom. But we can also put this obviously up, or we can rotate it all the way around the equator, and we can turn it on its axis this way. And you can do it in any combination, you know, so if you need this to be at a certain place to swing it around one way or the other, you can do all those things. So that's rotate projection. Rotate source is sort of like fake 3D, where you can actually swing this around, you know, the source material. So if I wanted this to appear like it was, you know, receding as I read it, or whatever, that's an option. This is particularly useful for the collage stuff, where if I was trying to make a video that appeared to be like attached to this wall, I could do it by creating sort of faux perspective with this. Does that make sense, everybody? Okay, I'm kind of deep into, like, I know especially on Zoom, probably a lot of these settings are quite small to read with the Premiere interface, but the VR plane to sphere thing is like essentially how I do almost all of what you're seeing here. The other tricks that I think are useful are, let's see, if I throw this other piece of footage here, so that we start rebuilding that that project that I was doing before. Let's say I just grab a portion of my backyard, and then I had this this still image, which I'll talk about in a second, how I sourced that. So here's my backyard shot with a 360 camera. Shouldn't take any extra processing to sort of do its thing. But this is a 360 photo that I downloaded off the internet, but you notice that it's not wrapping correctly, right? It's like pinched at the top and bottom. This is a function of this image is a different resolution than my video. It's actually higher resolution than my video. Let's sort of tangent there for a second, and I'll show you how did I even get this, right? The answer is, whoa, look at that guy. The answer is I searched on Wikimedia Commons, which is a great resource of like copyright free or sort of usable with attribution kinds of images, the sorts of things that are posted in Wikipedia and stuff like that. If you search Equirectangular 360, which is a mouthful or a handful to spell, but if you do it, you will get a rather surprising number of copyright-free, totally allowed to be used 360 equirectangular photos. Mostly they are either beautiful or notable architecture or cool landscapes, like a lot of national parks, a lot of churches, a lot of temples, you know, museums. So it's not like you can get, I don't know, anything. But if you wanted to play with this, you could very easily get a 360 photo to sort of fake what we were doing with how the American Museum of Natural History created, like using a 360 photo in the background. When you find one you like, you want to download the original file because you're trying to get the highest resolution possible. This particular one, actually, which I randomly clicked on, isn't that high res. It's just a 2K image. So it would actually look a little low res compared to our video. But the ones that I used in the original example, I happened to like this one because there wasn't a lot of trees to get in my way close up. This one is an 8K image, so it's too big. I downloaded the original file. It's awesome that it's bigger than we need. I threw it in my project, and then the trick here is if you've got a 360 photo that's too big for your video, you simply right-click it on the timeline and choose Scale to Frame Size. So now it's just had its settings scaled to be the same as the sequence. So we don't have any of those pinches or wrapping problems anymore. Okay? So now I've kind of built up the setup that I had in that finished version, right? And because this is a photo, I can just drag it, trim it out to make it as long as I want. It just sits there still doing nothing. What Gobi Desert liked to do for transitions is it liked doing a wipe, which video editors in the crowd will be like rolling their eyes because that's cheesy unless you're making Star Wars. But in VR, wipes are actually kind of cool because instead of being like a big clock wipe or something that goes right across the frame, they are more like a vignette that can sort of direct our attention somewhere. So if we go back into effects and the VR transitions now, there are a few VR video transitions. Iris wipe is probably the only tasteful one, or maybe the blur one, spherical blur, is probably also vaguely tasteful. But iris wipe is basically making a circle that opens like an aperture, and we follow it as it sort of passes over us. And I'm kind of animating this frame by frame so that you see it. So we kind of just like watch the scene pass over us, sort of like walking through a portal. Like I say, you may think this is like a wee bit tacky, but in headset, it's actually a kind of a nice cue. Like if I were, because remember the viewer can look anywhere, right? So if I decide I'm real interested in this kiddie pool and that's what I'm looking at, then I could potentially as an editor start my transition and be like, I'm going to assume that because this is the brightest object, or this is where my lead actor walks towards, or somebody says the word kiddie pool in my film or whatever, I'm going to assume that people might be looking this way. Now I can make an adjustment that is like, hey, starting here, I would like to bring your attention over to here, right? So you get this movement that sort of like targets something and then moves over your head. Very often a viewer will, you know, follow that movement. If you need to, you can click the literal sort of bandage that represents that wipe between the two clips. And there are settings for this where you can change what they call the point of interest. So, you know, if I didn't want it to be on, you know, my kid's playground or whatever, if I wanted it to be over here on the treehouse, that would be the starting point of the wipe. I just move the coordinates. And these could be anywhere in 360 space. It could start from the top or the bottom or anything. You just move the coordinates around. Also, you can have feathering on this wipe. So where it would be really tacky, probably, but maybe this is the right effect if you're doing something that's more graphic. You could have no feathering. But the more feathering you do, the more subtle this effect is. So eventually you could end up with something that transitions us from location to location and draws our attention to a certain part of the image. Another tool that I would like to just point out to you that can be really useful is wherever you sat your camera, it sort of has a natural, like, this is the front of the image, so to speak. But if you definitely want your viewer to be looking a certain way, you can rotate what counts as the front of the image using the VR rotate sphere effect. So we've done plane to sphere to make a flat video, a planar video into VR. But if we rotate sphere, we just drag it onto the clip. And similarly, we have an X, Y, and Z. If we roll or tilt, we can do, you know, surprising anti-gravity things and make the top the bottom. That could be useful if for some reason you had to shoot upside down or whatever, if you hung a tripod from a ceiling or something. But what we're likely to want to do here is simply just change the y-axis. So why I'm doing this, everybody, is your video has a kind of natural front, and wherever a person starts the video, this would be what they start on. If I don't want them looking at my house at the start, if I want them looking at my garage, I can change where the quote unquote start is. This really matters if we want these effects to be like, oh, I know because whatever, because there was an actor or the paleontologist person walks across the set, ends up here, stands by the chairs, let's say. I could bet, you know, 50 to 1 that my attention, my viewer's attention is going to be on this part of the screen. Well, then there better be something interesting there on the next shot. You know what I'm saying? Like, we wouldn't want to cut from the interesting thing to like the most boring part of the frame if something really cool is happening back here. So you can rotate sphere to say where people should be looking. Does everybody follow that? Yes. Okay, good deal. So those are my two like powerhouse effects and my one kind of powerhouse transition. Plane to sphere is gonna let you take flat video and make it into VR. Rotate sphere is gonna let you change what looks like the front. And VR iris wipe is gonna let you do that kind of portal thing that, that changes from scene to scene. Now, the last thing I wanna make you aware of here before I stop is sort of like the meat and potatoes of that whole collage section of the Gobi Desert piece, is taking lots of little pieces of flat video or still images, feathering their edges, putting plane to sphere on them, and putting them around this this collage, right? So here's what I did in short. I threw the black and white effect on this footage because they got away with quite a lot getting the archive footage into black and white landscape. And I grabbed this piece of footage of an expedition to Guatemala in 1934 off of archive.org, which incidentally, just like Wikimedia, is another great source for copyright-free photos and audio, but in this case, films as well. So I got an expedition footage off of archive.org, downloaded it as a QuickTime movie, and grabbed parts of it. So I'm gonna grab just this little section of a car going up a hill, setting my in and out points with I and O on my keyboard, and then I just click and drag that clip down onto my timeline. So it pops here, and as you can see, just like the text, it's sort of cylindrical, right? Now, also just like the text, if I tried to put it anywhere but at the equator, it starts to disappear into the nothing, right? So we're not going to do that. We're going to VR plane to sphere it. So VR plane to sphere. Now it looks flat, like we've got a flat screen TV hanging out in our landscape. I can use scale, again, not up on motion, but scale under VR plane to sphere to make it appear to be further away in the landscape or closer. This is really important when I'm trying to make us buy that there's a car and people, you know, at some distance from ourselves. Like I probably want to make this look, I guess, like it's in the distance, you know, sort of somewhere. And then the one thing I haven't mentioned about plane to sphere, which gets us a lot of mileage here, is there's a feather setting. If you turn it all the way up, unfortunately, that's as feathered as you can get. And this is one complaint I have about VR plane to sphere. Mostly I sing its praises, but I wish you could feather a lot more than this for collage work. But I can show you a way around that if we have time. But anyway, this starts to get you the sense that you didn't just paste a rectangle onto your film anymore. Now you could sort of almost imagine that this is part of the landscape. And then just like before, we can rotate projection to put it wherever we're trying to put it around the equator. I can start to move it up. If you put complex rotations in, you'll notice that like things don't move the way you would think anymore. They sort of all affect each other. So like now Y kind of moves around in a diagonal because it's also been rotated on a couple of its axes. So it can get a little confusing to place things exactly where you want them. But once you do, it more or less stays put. Advanced Premiere folks could start thinking about like, oh, I could also keyframe any of these things, you know, animate all of these settings so that it moves and stuff like that. But the one thing that I think I would like to say before I stop here about that feathering business is all this feathering allows you to do is just soften the slightest edge of the rectangle, right? But sometimes you want to do a lot more than that. Sometimes you'd like to like cut an amorphous organic shape into this and feather that. Anybody in here who knows about like matting in Premiere would be like, oh yeah, right. Just go up to the matte shape on opacity and like draw a custom matte or something. But unfortunately, all of that is subject to the geometry of 360 video. So if you start doing that just with the normal settings, this gets all screwed up. Like it happens before VR plane to sphere gets applied and the geometry gets all screwed up. If you try to do it on VR plane to sphere, that ends up just matting out. Certain sections are getting the VR plane to sphere effect applied and certain aren't. Anyway, there's no easy way to do this with this clip as it is now. The way that you do it is you right click on this clip and make it its own nested sequence. Okay. If I'm boggling your mind, I'm sorry, but if you really want to do some interesting collage work on these things, you have to make this thing its own sequence. And you do that by right-clicking the clip, choosing nest, and then you give it a name. So I'm going to call this Truck Hill. Now, this gets its own little sequence in our project called Truck Hill. And a sequence, incidentally, is another timeline. And if we double click that other timeline, if we double click Truck Hill, like this is Truck Hill. It's just that one clip. But its settings are all wrong. It's set up as a sequence in 5.7K and it's VR. So we got to change all that because this footage is 640 by 480 and it's not VR. And when we hit OK, now we've got footage that shouldn't have VR plane to sphere on it, right? We've just got a piece of footage that is hanging out in its own sequence. Now we can do weird things to its matting. So if I wanted to make a custom mat that was like organically shaped and feathered in a greater degree than you can feather in the other thing, I could do it here, right? And now this is my video. I've done all the non-VR effects in its own non-VR sequence. So I'm just keeping all the VR geometry out of it right now. It's like, it's quarantined, right? And then when we go back to this, now, see this? It has all the funky organic matting that I made before, but it's kept separate. It happens inside the sequence. So now when we do VR plane to sphere on the sequence, we can do everything we would want to do with it. Scale, rotate, all of it without messing up our geometry. Okay, so there's a lot of rigmarole to make that happen, but it's essentially just a rinse and repeat process. So let me go back to that finished version that I did before. Each of these clips now, everything from the group of old dudes in the expedition to the map of Middle Earth that I put in the sky, all of these get their own sequence, right? Like their own nested sequence. Like here's map, and same deal. It's just a map with its own custom mat on it. And then each of those got VR plane to sphere. They got rotated to a certain part of the frame, and they got a cross dissolve on the heads and tails so that they would come and go. And that's essentially how, and this possum that I said I was proud of, that's also, as you can see, keyframed so that it moves when the pan happens in the original film, so the tree trunk kind of stays in the same place. So you can do all those effects you would want to do to a normal piece of footage, just so long as you nest it inside another sequence and then put VR plane to sphere on the nest. Whew. So I know that's a lot to cram into an hour, but if we record it and you rewatch it and follow along, you really would, I think, be able to make everything we saw in that Gobi Desert piece, which I think is rather impressive and made entirely out of flat non-VR video, I might add. You could make all that just by using those couple of tricks. And similarly, I didn't quite get to the circles and arrows, but it's the same thing. It's VR plane to sphere on an image of a circle and an arrow that I made in Photoshop with a transparent background. So that's every effect that they did in that rather complicated but very cool documentary video. What do you think?
That was very cool, Ryan. And I know that a lot goes into it, but at the same time, it's not too complicated because you just use the same effects. Very cool. I have one quick question. I know that maybe other people have questions too.
But it's basically three effects. It's basically three effects.
What is your go-to settings, or how do you distribute it? Like, what is your go-to if you want people to experience it, the most amount of people, whether it be through VR headsets or just watching it online or something? What is your go-to for distribution?
YouTube. YouTube is awesome for these. And if I posted in the chat the YouTube link for that fossil hunting in the Gobi, and if I just pull that up real quick and go back to my main screen. So here is why YouTube is cool for 360 video. Everybody has it in the browser. You just click and drag. It works exactly the same way as we were doing in the monitor window of Premiere. So here's that map. Theirs isn't of Middle Earth. Theirs is actually of the Gobi Desert. But here's what they were building the same way as we built, and you can just click and drag as you watch on YouTube. And this would probably supply the video to the most people. They would probably experience it like this, but anyone who was aware that you can also take your phone and open up the YouTube app, you could then watch it like this. And if I want to look up, I just lift my phone up. If I want to look down, I put my phone down. And that movement is tracked by the YouTube app, not like YouTube in Safari on your phone, but the actual YouTube app. And you can watch that way. And then the coolest way is an actual headset, which you can either fake by doing the Google Cardboard thing, which again would just be like YouTube app. And then there's like a little Google Cardboard button as you're watching stuff on the YouTube app. It's like a little icon that looks like VR glasses. You click it, and then you drop your phone into one of those things that straps your phone to your head with some Perspex lenses so you can focus that close. And then just looking around creates a VR headset essentially. If you own or have access to something fancier like an Oculus or a Vive or an Index, any of these things, they also have YouTube apps. So that's why I like YouTube for free distribution of VR video. And honestly, even in the stuff where I'm like trying to show my creative work in film festivals and I'm like, oh, I'm just not putting it on YouTube so just anybody can see it. It's supposed to be exclusive at the film festivals or whatever during its run. I still just post it on YouTube and put a private password link, and then you send that as the screener, so to speak, for anybody who's judging if your film's good enough to be in their festival. So YouTube seems to be the best, most universally, applicable way to distribute these VR videos. Vimeo also does it, which is kind of a competitor, but it just seems like most people have YouTube or have experience using it.
Very cool. Anyone else have any questions?
When you go to export from Premiere, just as recently as a year ago, there was a button you had to click on the export settings that said video is VR. It was like one of the many export settings that you could click on a checkbox. But now it's on by default if you have the sequence settings as VR. So like, I'm sort of only saying that as one of those like double check it kind of things, but there's not even anything special you have to do to export VR video anymore, so long as the project is set up as VR.
Yeah, I remember back in the day you used to have to put plugins and copy code into YouTube. A bunch of different steps.
You had to like
it's easier.
Metadata injector, it was, and this has happened quickly. Just probably 18 months ago, you had to like run a whole piece of software and add information to your video after the fact. But Premiere has caught up really fast, and so too has After Effects if you're in the Adobe environment. Incidentally, everybody, we as Towson faculty have access to all of these Adobe suites, all these pieces of software. There's sort of a little bit of a process where you have to kind of petition OTS and give a reason why your teaching or scholarship requires this software. But if you're here, maybe you're thinking of using this kind of footage in your scholarship or your teaching. That already seems like the justification to me, so you would write a paragraph or two, probably copy your chairperson or whoever, and I think it's OTS. I mean, you would just Google like Towson Adobe Creative Suite, and there's a whole page that explains the process. But we can, install this stuff on our work computers, and even like, a home desktop, you get like 2 installs. So.
Yeah, I definitely take advantage of that.
Yeah,
so
I'm gonna hit stop
because I know we're a little bit over our time.